Hello and welcome to tonight's Truth Proof live stream. We've got a great guest on tonight, as you see in the title card, and thanks everybody for joining tonight's live stream. I can see a few of you in the chat. I will do a name call shortly, or a name check, I should say. And let's see, we've got Warren Hardcastle in tonight's stream, and Deborah Singleton, by the way, is our moderator for tonight. And she'll be checking out any dubious comments, as always, and she does a good job. Thanks, Debs, for coming on tonight. Teresa Walker's in the chat. We've got Joe Weeks, Malcolm Dodgson. Welcome, Mally, to the show. Patricia Adams Wright. We've got Chris Wright. Good evening, Chris. I think we'll be meeting up shortly in a couple of days' time, I think, Chris. Joe Weeks, Stevie Trees, John Meakin, Karen Taylor. Yes, hello and hello everybody. So everybody, this is the Truth Proof live stream. I'm Les Drake from Digital Creations, producing the show for Truth Proof. Here we're gonna hit the road running. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and I've got to say one thing actually. Thanks for all the super chat we've had in recent weeks. That's really beneficial for the channel here at Truth Proof. But without further ado, it brings me to welcome Paul and his guest. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Les. Another week's come round very quickly, and as you know, looking at the banner, we're talking to Preston Dennett, and I'm really pleased to be talking to him tonight. UFO researcher, all-round paranormal investigator. I'm sure he'll correct me if I've got any of that wrong. Author of 28 books. Now, I don't know how he's done that, because that's an incredible feat. So extensive knowledge, I think we can all agree. So Preston, welcome to Truth Proof.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, Les.
You're welcome. I mean, do you want to start with just giving a little bit of background about you and your research before we get into any specifics?
Yeah, sure. UFOs are, it's not a subject I was ever looking for. In fact, I hated the subject. I really did. I mean, I was skeptical. I was, very scientifically minded, very analytical. Thought the stars were too far away for UFOs to be real. Certainly heard it on TV occasionally, and it was always treated like a joke. And had no idea that people in my own family had seen UFOs. I mean, major encounters. My sister-in-law had seen grays. She did not tell me this. I had friends who had very close encounters with missing time. People that I worked with. All of this was unknown to me until 1986.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. How old were you then, Preston?
I was young, 21. Yeah.
Okay.
So a young man.
Yep.
So yeah, 1986. I remember it vividly, actually, because it changed my life. It was like November 17, 1986, and watching the news. I've got a pretty big family. There's 6 of us kids.
Yeah.
And so we weren't all there because someone had moved out by this point. But there was a number of us there watching the news, and on comes one of these major newscasters. I forget who it was, but starts talking about this sighting over Alaska, which I now know is a very well-known, very well-authenticated sighting, in which this Japanese commercial airliner was basically followed by 2 super large walnut-shaped UFOs on radar, multiple witnesses. A great case.
Yeah.
But on the news, they spent maybe 1 minute on this, and they said, this pilot, this crazy pilot, look, he thinks he saw a UFO. You ever seen one, Jane? No, I haven't. It was very tongue-in-cheek, very jokey, and they moved on. Yeah. And I remember they showed the pilot, Captain Kenju Torochi, I thought to myself, oh, that poor pilot. What an idiot. He must have seen a reflection off the ice cap.
Yeah.
This is what I'm thinking, right? Or he's just flat out lying. But it didn't look like he was lying. And I thought, wow, why would he ever say he saw a UFO? Because he's got to be throwing his career away, which turned out to be true. I mean, he was grounded. I
Right.
later found out. So this is when I started thinking about the subject. And I remember my brother Mark, 5 or 7 years earlier, said he'd seen a UFO. I remember the day he came running to the house. I was probably, 13, 15 years old. He's like, I saw a UFO. And I looked
what
at
were
him
your
like,
reaction? What were your reaction to that?
I rolled my eyes. I'm like, shut up. I don't believe. It's like it was very low. It's like telephone poles, very low.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I just didn't pay attention. But after hearing this report in the news, I asked him, I'm like, Mark, tell me again what you saw or what you think you saw. And he described an incredible sighting. I mean, it really was. He saw a metallic disc with colored lights, a dome on top, right in front of him, practically eye level because he was up on some elevation, and had 2 friends with him. And they chased this down the street for 15 minutes. Other cars were chasing it. And so I knew Mark wasn't lying. It was pretty clear to me he wasn't misperceiving. It wasn't a hallucination. There was other witnesses. He's like, you don't believe me? Ask Phil and Greg, his friends, which I ended up doing. I called them up. And they were super excited to talk to me. They're like, no one ever believes me. And they described this same thing Mark saw. I'm like, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'm like, really, aliens? I don't think so. So I started asking everybody. And boy, that was a mistake as far as I was concerned. Because a lot, like I said, my sister-in-law had seen UFOs. She had 2 friends with her. She didn't tell me at the time she had seen grays. That came a little bit later. But yeah, I had a friend who was a pilot, a flight instructor. She had seen a UFO. I'm like, really? She said, yes, it came right down over our house. We were inside. We heard this loud buzzing noise. It came running out, and it was this huge egg-shaped object. My friend was with me. It wasn't just me. I'm like, wow. Every single person I talked to had another witness with them. That blew out what.
Did you think you'd been sort of in a closet, like, or burying your head in sand until what? We know 1986 is the time that you really took this seriously, or that's what you're saying, Preston. But what made you actually cross the bridge? What was it, the airline pilot's sighting that made you start asking people, or was there one specific thing?
It was not so much one specific thing. I mean, there were definitely some turning points there. I mean, the first, of course, was hearing it from my own family.
Yeah.
Because these are people I know are not going to lie to me. And friends, too. And, I brought it up at work. And a lady I'd worked with for years says, yeah, me and my whole family. Every single person I talked to had witnesses. So that was a turning point.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought people who saw UFOs were alone. I don't know why. It was just a misconception I had. And then I'm like, okay, let's check out some books and I'll prove that these guys are seeing swamp gas. Even though I knew it wasn't, I started looking for books. And there weren't, certainly not a lot like there are today.
Yeah.
But there was enough to say that, wow, this is something that's been studied for decades. This is taken very seriously. There are, pilots who've seen it, generals, people in all levels of the military. Jimmy Carter, of course, President Carter had seen one. And
yeah,
I'm like, wow, there are a lot of people, and there's a government cover-up. So that was kind of a turning point. I think the real turning point came when I was talking to my sister-in-law. She's like, well, I saw something that I haven't told you. And I'm like, what did you see? She says, well, I was walking outside my home in Van Nuys late one evening, and I saw what I thought were 2 children standing in front of this school. This is Stagg Street Elementary School in Van Nuys, California. And I'm like, okay. She said, well, I walked, I thought, it's too late for children to be out at that hour. It was like 11:30. They were short, so they had to be young children.
Yeah.
And as she got closer, she realized they were bald. She's like, well, could they be wearing masks? It's not Halloween. This was summer. And as she walked up right next to them, 10 feet away, they turned and looked at her. And she said they weren't human. They were not human. I'm like, what do you mean? And she started to give me a very clear description of grays, which she had never heard of. She had not seen any UFO shows. There were very few. There was In Search Of. I think that was the only one that ever covered this. And really gave it this very clear description of grays. She's an artist, so a really good observer and an eidetic memory. I mean, she's got a memory that is just almost foolproof.
Right.
So
and
hearing her...
sorry, Preston, I've got you and go full flow. Carry on, sorry.
Yeah, hearing her describe these details, I'm like, if she starts describing a jumpsuit, she did. I started to be able to predict what she was going to say. I'm like, oh my God, if she says the dark almond eyes, sure enough, she did. She says their skin was so white. I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been reading. And so that was a real turning point for me. I'm like, well, aliens. People are seeing aliens. They're here. We're being invaded. No one's talking about this. This field really did explode in when Whitley Strieber wrote Communion. Bud Hopkins' book Missing Time became a bestseller. At that point, it hadn't. I did find the book, but it was by a small publisher. And Gary Kinder wrote the book Light Years about Billy Meyer. That helped publicize all of this. So I kind of rode that wave. I mean, I just got into it right when the subject started to really get some real attention.
When it got some momentum, yeah. You touched earlier, unless you want to continue with family member experiences for a few minutes, but you touched earlier on a government conspiracy, a government cover-up, should we say. How much have you looked into that, Preston?
Yeah, that was really disturbing. That was really upsetting to me. Because it became very clear to me right off the bat that there was a cover-up. I mean, this was not speculation. This is something that's easily proven through documents released from the Freedom of Information Act here in the US, but quite evidential throughout the world.
Yeah.
And Project Blue Book, I thought, wow, here's an official government study. It really wasn't. Not if you read the books of J. Allen Hynek, who was part of it. It was really more of a cover-up effort. And their Air Force's go-to explanation was hoaxes, hallucinations, and misperceptions. Yeah. And I had bought into that. And it was upsetting to find out that my own tax dollars and all of our money was being spent in large amounts to make UFO witnesses look like idiots.
Well
when
said.
they knew full on, absolutely conclusively that this was a real phenomenon. So it was completely disingenuous. And that was really upsetting and still is. This whole government, there is a conspiracy. There's a cover-up. They know far, far more than they are saying. We have documents from every single intelligence agency, military in the US proving this. It is upsetting for sure.
Yeah, we kind of touched on it just before the show. I don't think we're meant to, but for something of no defense significance, that's what I said, and of no importance, they place a massive amount of secrecy and importance on it, don't they? Which we find, as you've said, with release of files over the years, and how deep do you think the cover-up goes, or do you think that people are in higher places are starting to open up more?
I think it's very deep. I think this subject is probably one of the most sensitive out there. I think enormous amounts of our black budget are being put towards this. And I think they are studying it so intently that they are, watching over everything that goes on. UFO groups, the APRO, formed by Jim and Cora Lorenzen, was the first. And they are true heroes because they formed this group way back in 1952. And it's a shame that an official study of UFOs was fallen to ordinary citizens instead of being open and official. Our government was studying this.
I was going to say the study is taking place, but there's a smoke screen, and it's under our radar, isn't it? We're not privy to it. And UFO organizations, UFO groups, MUFON, people like yourself, you're kind of at the front, sort of pioneering this. I don't know whether you'll ever get recognition long after you've gone, but that's what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's just surprises me that this subject is, so viciously covered up. And all these UFO groups, APRO was infiltrated by the CIA. They caught one of their field investigators as a CIA agent. And if you look at the history of these other ones, like NICAP, for example, that dissolved because of struggles within the membership.
And what do you think it was for, Preston? And that's not as silly as it sounds. Was it to find out what these people knew? Was it to discredit things, to sort of dissolve the organization, the group? What do you think the reasons, or do you think it was all of them things?
Yeah, I do. I think it was to keep very close watch on what these groups know and the information that's being disseminated by them. And Jim and Cora Lorenzen found out firsthand that they had files on them being held by the government. And there's been other researchers who have looked into this and have discovered that probably most UFO researchers of any, influence do have files on them, are being surveilled.
Yeah.
And I can't say for sure whether that's true, but I can say I've had some problems myself that, well, call them problems or indicators pointing towards this, because early on in my research, I did have phone problems. And I don't know if my phone was tapped, but whenever I'd call up to do an interview, there'd be weird clicking noises and static. And I had my mail. My mail was being opened. I was very prolifically sending out articles. I've written 100 articles over the years. And I had, 10, 20, 30 articles going out to magazines and stuff. And it was not unusual for them to come back opened. And I live at the time in a secure building.
Yeah.
I thought, am I losing my mind? I brought my sister over. We worked together. So we'd come to my condo for lunch. Occasionally, I'm like, you open my mailbox and you tell me what you see. And she's like, wow, all these envelopes are opened. Is that normal? I'm like, I don't think so. And the real indicator to me was once when this was 1992 to 94, I was investigating this major wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon. I ended up writing a book about it because this was, a cluster of sightings over a period of 2 years. That was, your typical UFO wave. Cars being chased down the road, abductions, landings, multi-witness sightings, sometimes multiple objects. I mean, a lot. So this was a big, big case. I contacted the police. I was putting up flyers. I was going door to door. And this is when I got a call from some guy who I don't know who he was, but he said he was within government, had a top secret clearance, was a colonel, had did satellite mapping. And he's going on and on about his resume. After he says, are you the UFO researcher, Preston Dennett? I'm like, yeah. So my number was out there. I had a lot of people calling me. And he started to threaten me in a really sort of roundabout way. He said, don't you know that what you're doing is dangerous? I'm like, oh, is it? What do you mean? He says, this subject is dangerous. It could get you killed. I'm like, really? He said, yeah. And you don't know what you're getting into. I'm like, what am I getting into? He says, it's not what you think it is. I'm like, oh, well, what is it? He says, you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm like, okay. So he was not, he's just being so vague. And then, so he's going back and forth like this. And then he finally says, besides, there's no pager in it. And that rang a bell for me because at the time I was in college, and I'd learned techniques of persuasion.
Yeah.
There's like 5 or 10 things people will say to persuade you. And I'm like, wow, he's going down the whole list. And I thought to myself, well, there's no pay dirt in it. If there's no pay dirt, how can this be dangerous?
Yeah.
That's contradictory. So we ended up just kind of, I'm like, ending the conversation.
Did he contact you after that?
No, not that I'm aware of, but I was doing a lot of conventions, speaking at bookstores,
Yeah.
UFO groups, and as often as not, there'd be some guy in the audience or coming up to my table wearing a suit, mirrored sunglasses, hair perfectly. I mean, just such a cliche of a CIA agent.
Right. It
And
does it does make you think everything's a little bit of a conspiracy, or there's something, you're being watched or your phone's being tapped. That's only happened to me, that feeling, once. I was looking into some aircraft crashes, or one particular over at North Sea in the 1980s one, and I'd contacted a few people, Ministry of Defence and Historical Records Office, and I got a phone call out of the blue asking me to stop looking into events over the North Sea. And then it kind of makes you think, are you going nuts? Because I were having phone calls and talking about this to other people or interested parties and people that were helping me. And I were hearing what you just described, the clicks on the phone and like the tapping sounds. And they'd be saying to me, did you just hear that? Did you hear that? And you kind of think, am I imagining all this? But it's not happening now. But, it did. I mean, we'd got some pretty influential, I had some pretty influential people looking into it, like one of the top salvage companies in the world, an employer of them. And I mean, I don't just mean fetching a fishing boat out at harbour. I mean, a really heavy duty salvage company, and they looked into some things for me, and it seemed to cause a few ripples. It's so much so that I don't even talk about it at the moment. So yeah, what we say does get heard in some places, probably a little bit more than we think, Preston. But sorry to cut across you there, and carry on, my friend. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I think people are probably being watched and surveilled.
Yeah.
But I also think this subject is so explosive, so expansive, so extensive, that they're neck deep in it. And, there's so many people interested in this, so many people researching it, even, quietly.
Yeah.
And some are more vocal, some are really trying to get the word out in terms of books and interviews and things like this. But a lot of people are looking into this.
Well,
And
just before, while it's still fresh in my mind, you were on about the phone call, and they said there's no money in it. I think that's what the guy alluded to, didn't he? What do you think that they want from the UFO knowledge? Is it because there must be money there? There must be some kind of knowledge there, or technology. It's got to be technology. What do you think it's for? Is it for military gain? Is it for the advancement of mankind? I don't think it is, really, because we'd all be sharing in it. What do you think it's the great need for the secrecy is all about?
yeah, I think there's probably a whole laundry list of reasons why.
Yeah.
The main one being, I think that was the policy from day one. Really, with the Roswell crash and the clampdown on that, they're like, okay, we're keeping this top secret. We're just going to keep this secret. We don't know what this is. We don't know the implications of it. And so that was just the policy. I think that's one of the main reasons. But really, ultimately, I think it comes down to greed, power, corruption.
And is it more a case then, like if we just stay with Roswell for a moment, that they've gone down that road and entrenched themselves so deep in there's no substance to what this guy's talking about or what Paul's talking about, we can't really backtrack.
Yeah, they've painted themselves to an extent into a corner. And there's been a lot of rumors throughout the year. I mean, everyone, since I got into this field, they're like, disclosure is coming. It's going to be next year. And it never happened.
No.
And then now it finally has had a few baby steps. And they are tiny little baby steps. But they did actually use the word extraterrestrial. They did say materials from otherworldly vehicles.
Yeah.
which is huge. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
180-degree turnaround,
Yeah.
which I think only happened because their hand was forced. I mean, literally, the cards were scattered on the table. The cat was out of the bag. If they did not disclose, it would harm the cover-up.
Yeah.
They would not be able to continue on with any credibility. Without disclosing, people would just lose complete trust in government, which is kind of happening.
Yeah.
I think they're not disclosing voluntarily. I mean, some of these videos that came out were basically leaked. So they had to take steps towards disclosure, not for the good of humanity, just to maintain control over the cover-up, over people's perception of this phenomenon.
Do you think there's a drip, we're being drip fed it then, or do you think it's all unintentional? You know, because I look at the adverts, I look at the games that we all play. I was going to say just children, but a lot of adults play games. But there's a lot of aliens involved. We're sort of being drip fed and nurtured into the belief that all this is normal. Do you think that's part of it, or just part of what we think to be doing?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that that's from government as much as it might be from ETs themselves, honestly, because they are conducting what amounts to a publicity campaign.
Yeah.
And I've come to this, I mean, I'm not the only one who's come to this conclusion. Way back in the day, Dr. Robert Salisbury, is that his name? Frank Salisbury wrote the Utah UFO display. He was one of the first to say, hey, UFOs are putting on displays, they want to be seen. And that's absolutely true for, the Phoenix Lights, the Hudson Valley wave, the Belgian wave. There was a wave in France in 1954, I believe it was, where it was very clear they wanted to be seen. I wrote a book called Schoolyard UFO Encounters after finding out about the Rua, Zimbabwe case in 1994. I thought, hey, there's the Westall case in Melbourne, Australia, 1966. Wait a second. They also landed next to Crestview Elementary 1 year later, to the day. Wait, the Hillsdale College incident, 1966, 2 weeks before Hillsdale. 87 students and school officials and police saw a UFO hovering for 2 hours, and it landed next to the school. So this is a display. This is a publicity stunt. They want to be seen. And I think that's what we're seeing, why this has saturated our culture. Video games, advertisements, movies, science fiction. This is an idea whose time has come. And I think ETs are fighting the cover-up. Like, okay, government won't disclose. Well, watch this. We are going to disclose in a way that's very clever, very subtle. Well, not, but sort of doing it without causing complete social, panic.
Do you know, Preston? I'm not contradicting you here, but I'm just asking the question: if they want disclosure, if the ETs, we'll call them ETs, if the visitors, as Whitley Strieber would call them, if they want us to know about them, why do it so subtle? Why just to a group of school children? Why not? Why not
Because,
just?
Yeah, I can only speculate, but I suspect, and actually this is what contactees have been told. And that's where I've focused a lot of my research, is just talking to people who've had actual contact. Because I think that's where we're getting the most information, certainly not from government. And there's a lot of people speculating, but I think the reason is because they are aware of how fear-based our society is. They are aware how much divisiveness there is in our culture. They are aware of how paralyzed we are by our limited belief systems.
Yeah.
A very fundamentally religious person is going to have a difficult time seeing these things come down. And we have a tendency to demonify or deify more powerful beings. We have a tendency to, fear anything that looks different from us.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they want to cause any sort of trouble in our society. They could come down and solve all our problems. They could stop our wars. They could clean our pollution. They could solve our energy crisis. But they're not doing that. Why? Why aren't they Why don't they just end the cover up? They could do all of this so easily, and they're not. So we have to, yeah, that's the $1 million question. But I think they know that we have some growing up to do, and that you cannot force a flower to bloom. Every parent knows a child has to solve their own problems.
Yeah.
And so you can guide them, you can provide them information, you can show them little guideposts along the way. But ultimately, we have to solve our own problems. We have to solve our pollution. We have to solve our problems with war and aggression and racism and an unequal distribution of wealth. We have to solve our problems with, delusion and fear. So I think they're doing what they can by contacting people in a sort of grassroots movement.
So you say they're doing what they can. And I know you're not meaning this, but it sounds maybe to some people like we're talking about one faction of some alien race or visitor. They can't all be good, are they?
No, I think it would be terribly naive to say, I mean, the universe is practically infinite. But just from a logical standpoint, anyone who's reached the ability to travel among the stars, who has been able to handle a very advanced technology that could destroy their own species, has probably also advanced ethically, morally. So I think most of the beings, the entities that, I think they're ETs. I mean, I know there's all kinds of theories, time travelers, interdimensional. I think it's my assessment that most of what we're seeing is extraterrestrial in the classic sense, are probably also ethically advanced and have access to, free labor. They don't need us as slaves. They have access to resources, have access to everything they need. There would be no reason for them to be hostile or take over or hurt other people. And I think that's what we're seeing. Yes, some people do have negative encounters, but by and large, in my own files, and I think this is reflected by many other major researchers, the contact experience, while it can be traumatic in the beginning and cause a lot of fear, is ultimately benevolent, beneficial, spiritually transformative. And this is backed up by facts. This is not speculation. If I can, real quickly, when someone's
be as extensive as you want.
When someone is taking, because I looked at this, I came into this field, I'm like, this is bad news. Oh my God. People are being abducted, kidnapped against their will, undressed, laid out, poked at by bug-like extraterrestrials who have no feelings for them, experimented on. I was horrified. I thought, and I was kind of buying into this whole fear-based thinking. I'm like, but I started to build up my database of cases. And I was looking at other researchers, because not all research out there is objective. I'm like, wow, some of these people are not objective. That was a shock. I'm like, so that early on, I'm like, I have to be very careful here. I cannot throw out evidence, because there are researchers who I know for a fact were throwing out the spiritual aspects of people's encounters.
Because it didn't fit with their narrative.
Right. They were very nuts and bolts. I want to prove this. I don't want to talk about psychic stuff because I think it will damage my credibility. I'm like, that's not science. That's not how you solve a mystery. You don't put your theory first and you find the evidence to back it up. You gather the evidence and then build a theory. So that's what I started doing early on, because I saw that some of the research out there was not being done properly. And I built a database of cases and I looked at them. I'm like, wow, here's a healing case. That's interesting. This is one of the early cases I got. Someone is healed of a cyst. She says the ETs removed it. This is medically documented. And I instantly thought of a bunch of other cases. And that ended up being my first book. And that's when I started to look at this from a different angle. I'm like, okay, is this perhaps not as nefarious as I thought? And what I found was, yes, the physical examination is the thing most people will describe who are taken on board. And this can be very scary and quite traumatic and cause PTSD. And people come back with scars and, nightmares. And they're like, that's it. This is evil. I hate this. But as I gather these cases, I'm like, wow, a lot of these people are being healed. It's not just a few, it's quite a number. I mean, I've now got more than 300 cases. I sort of specialized in that because I'm like, no one else is looking into this. I thought, what else? What else is actually happening to people? And people who do not react with fear, people who are not terrified out of their minds, often remember their experiences much more extensively. They're not rendered unconscious. They're not rendered paralyzed. They're given freedom of movement. This is not at all unusual for someone to be taken, after a physical examination, they're given a little conversation. They are taken down to the engine room. Would you like to see how our craft works? It's not at all unusual. This happened to Raymond Moody, a very famous early case. I mean, I could list case after case after case. People are shown how these UFOs work. Then they're often taken to like an observation dome. Like, look at this star field. Isn't this beautiful? Happens all the time. People shown Saturn. I've got multiple cases of that personally. That happened to Leo Sprinkle. They were given warnings. This is the number one message from all ETs. You mentioned, what ET types are doing this. It's all of them. Our, praying mantis, grays, human-looking, strange humanoids, you name it, have the same message from day one. From the early 1950s to the present day, the message has always been the same, and it's warnings of the fact that we're destroying our planet, polluting it. Warnings that we are destroying ourselves with our warlike ways and our prejudices. Warnings against nuclear proliferation. That is the number one message from the ETs. And also a very strong spiritual aspect to this. And this is almost a rule. It's more a rule than an exception. People come back away from their encounters spiritually awakened to some degree, particularly if they've overcome their fear. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who come away from their encounters feeling that they have the ability to do hands-on healing.
Yeah.
They start having.
I was actually going to ask you, so you can carry on in a moment, if you've got any examples of people who've suddenly found some other gift, but stay with the healing and then move to that. If you've got any examples of it, I'd be really interested to hear.
Oh, I sure do. I've met them personally, and I've had them do energy work on me, and it's astonishing. I've had that at least 3 times from people who've, and many claim disability. But yeah, I had one lady she was the one who was healed, actually. She had disability. She had testimonials. She brought someone out of a coma. She cured someone of gestational diabetes when they were pregnant. And she's like, I can give you some energy work if you'd like, if you want to feel what it's like. Are you kidding? Of course. She's like, okay, remove your shoes and I'll run energy up through your feet. I'm like, oh, okay. This sounds interesting. And she held my feet and she pulsed energy up through them. And I can tell you, I've never felt anything like that. It was wasn't quite like electricity, but it was close. It felt like pulsations of energy rushing up through my legs all the way up to, the top of my head. And almost like it made you sort of vibrate. You could feel it. It was like water rushing through you.
Yeah.
And I went to another lady who had an encounter. She was, like many people, they quit their job and they start moving to a field of much more beneficial to humanity. And she became an energy healer. And she says, would you like to experience that? And I'm like, sure. And she did the same thing. She started working with my feet first and then over my body with kind of Reiki-like movements. And I'm looking at her and I saw these pastel lights coming out of her hands. I thought, no, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing pink lights and, lime green and blue. And then I was sure I saw it, because it was just vivid. Because when you see like your first thought is like, oh, I'm imagining things. Finally, I told her, I'm like, I swear that I see light coming out of your hands. And she smiled and she says, oh yeah, you see that, huh? A lot of people report that. Well, I talked to one lady. She had very horrific encounters with grays, which ended up becoming very spiritual. And she says the Greys taught her how to heal. She quit her job as a telephone operator and started doing massage therapy. And she's also got testimonials. And she says whenever she does it, she says people have seen blue light coming out of her hands. But she gets this vision. This is so interesting to me. She gets these visions of the Greys sitting up in their craft, and they're in front of these panels, and they're fussing with their little knobs and stuff to facilitate her ability to heal. So yeah, healing is a big part of this.
And I don't say this derogatory to this lady, but do you think that the Greys would devote time to sit in some other sphere of existence or up in their craft, channeling energy to this lady? Do you think they would do that?
Well, when she first told me that, it was one of the first I'd heard. I'm like, gosh, could that? But after hearing it so many times,
and feeling the energy coming from this person actually firsthand, which you have done, you see, this tonight's about you, Preston. But just to touch on it briefly, I've never had anything but bad experiences from childhood to 1998 with these things, and I'm yet to see any form of enlightenment or feel anything good about what happened to myself. So, and you talked about this lady having some horrific experiences with Greys. Did she tell you when it changed for her, when it became more spiritual and enlightening?
Yeah, she said she had gone through 3 months of hell, basically, because they were coming into her room and scaring the daylights out of her. She had a missing pregnancy, which was not at all pleasant for her. She was just didn't like it, and she was exhausted. She says, I hate this. This is not good. And to this day, she still feels a sense of violation. She's like, this is not all rainbows by any means. But she says at one point she could not go on. She says, that's it. I'm not doing this anymore. If I'm truly being abducted, I want to be fully conscious. And found herself on board a UFO. And there was a very human-looking being there who took her to her quarters. They're like, we're glad you've overcome your fear. This is what we were hoping would happen. Here's where you can stay. We want to show you some spiritual information. They took her out of her body. They said, look at what's surrounding your planet. Do you see that dark band? And she says, yeah, I see it. They said that those are all the negative thoughts of fear and greed and divisiveness and hate that people are putting out. So you really need to work on that. So it's a mixed bag for sure. There's a lady and people do have negative experiences. I'm not going to say that they don't, because I've talked to people who are like, no, they're demonic.
Just I don't know if you want to touch on this at all, but do you think, I think I know what you're going to say, but have we got what we would perceive as aliens living and walking amongst us? Have you researched into that?
Yes, I have. I suspect that we do. And given the fact that some of these ETs are, in fact, human looking, that would be a logical conclusion. If they have the, they look like us and have the ability to walk among us, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of became clear to me when I wrote UFOs over New York and found a bunch of cases. There was a case that was put forth by Whitley Strieber, the editor of his book, Bruce Lee, not the crime fighter, the martial arts artist rather, but the editor of Moral Books, said that he had an experience where he saw very unusual looking people in the bookstore. This is a fairly well-known story, but he says they were not human. They were all dressed up, bundled up, had huge sunglasses, but when he approached them, their eyes were twice the size of normal. He's like, they were not human. And I knew of another case where I think that comes from Bud Hopkins, where a lady saw a gray on a subway. And no one else seemed to see it. They can block their appearance from people, perhaps. So I started collecting cases. I ended up writing about this in one of my books, the Not From Here series, and devoted a chapter to it because I found a lot of cases and have since gotten others where they are. Yeah, I think they are walking among us. Different.
I spoke
pipes.
a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago. I spoke to a lady who tells me that she were on a train platform in Doncaster in the UK, and there's a chap next to her. She said, and I immediately knew we weren't human. She said, and he knew, and he communicated with me, speaking into my mind. And we got on the train together. We sat opposite, and he were telling her things. I can't remember now, to be honest with you, what he were telling her. But she had this conversation with this man and left the train. So she firmly believes that these life forms are here, living amongst us, moving amongst us. I don't know, for what secretively. I suppose they would have to be secretive, wouldn't they? You know, I mean, because like you've just said, there'd be some government agency wanting to snap them up and take them somewhere, and I don't know what they'd do, but they'd try and get whatever they could out of them, wouldn't they, before they'd ended their existence. But just before we move on, Preston, we'll just check whether Les has got any questions, because I'm sure people in audience listening to this are fascinated by what you've got to say. Les?
Yes, I've got to say, what a great show tonight, guys, and thank you very much for your contribution tonight, Preston. Okay, so we've got one from Tony Worrell. The question is, are the USOs still regularly seen in the Catalonia Channel?
Oh yeah, yeah. USOs, unidentified submersible objects, have recently got more attention. And I have to tell you, I got cases from the moment I started doing research. One of my first was a USO in the Santa Catalina Channel. And then I got another one, and then another. I'm like, wow, there's quite a few USOs off the Santa Catalina Channel, which is, Southern California, from Santa Barbara at the north end, Channel Islands, all the way down. I mean, really to San Diego, but San Clemente.
How deep's the channel?
It's deep. It's got an average depth of 2,500 feet, but up to a mile deep in parts, 5,000 feet.
Really?
There's a big trench that runs right up the coast. I talked to some really good witnesses. I mean, these are Navy officers who are, trained witnesses. One guy was a submarine navigator, retired, but he had a USO encounter there. Another was on board the USS Long Beach in the military at the time of an encounter. This was on the far side of Catalina, but still part of this complex. Yes, there are still cases there. Some UFO groups, UAPX has set up some really extensive and expensive equipment, and have caught some amazing footage and stuff. So I expect
what are they
we'll be
catching,
seeing
Preston?
that.
What are they catching? Are they catching what they perceive as craft or light phenomena?
I am not privy to exactly what they've caught, but they've told me, because I was a part of their team and helped sort of coordinate as a consultant some of the best places to look. And they are approaching this from a very, very scientific angle, which I'm so happy about, because, there's a lot of reality TV shows going out there, like Josh Gates just went out there for his show and caught 3 really amazing bits of footage. It caught a USO coming up right out of the water. It's great footage. So that was just last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's still active. One of the most active areas in the world. I got 150 cases in this stretch of water, which is not that huge.
So location then is key to these events then, because it's concentrated there, is it? Or are we finding things rippling out from it?
Oh, I got cases all over the world, but that particular location, mile for mile, is one of the most active.
Yeah.
But there are active areas. Puerto Rico has a lot. Myrtle Beach on the East Coast. I've got cases. I mean, Hamilton Lake, Arkansas, has a USO case where a guy was abducted. I've got a case from Lake Miccosukee in Florida. One of my favorite USO cases was really impressive to me because it comes from a gentleman by the name of Ray Sachs, who was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore in 1971. He's now retired, elderly, and he wanted to do his part for disclosure and contacted me because he said while on the USS Clamagore, which is a submarine which carried nuclear-tipped torpedoes, that was kept secret at the time, was heading up the East Coast at night, 1971, heading at 12 knots, and he was on lookout with another petty officer and the commander and the second in command when a USO showed up. It says it came in at about 100 knots from the stern and started pacing the submarine. He was in touch with the sonar room. The captain says, what does the sonar see? And Ray says, well, they don't see anything. There's nothing on sonar. And this thing was silent. It was quite large. It was talking 50, 100 feet away, which is that does not happen.
No.
Submarines do not come that close ever. Ships do not come that close. That is absolutely against all maritime navigation rules. They don't do that.
They don't travel at 100 knots to get to a given place, do they?
No, they can't travel. We have nothing
No.
that can travel that fast underwater.
That's
And
brilliant.
this thing paced the submarine for 15 minutes. And he said it was real interesting because one by one, the higher ranking officers came up on deck because they wanted to see it. And they also like, wow, I've never seen anything like it. This was just a big, bright, white, round light, which had to be pretty shallow because, they could see it. They couldn't see the actual craft. It was just this light. And I think this was a clear message. Anything that's nuclear is very closely watched.
Yeah.
Nuclear weapons, nuclear materials, nuclear power stations of any kind. A UFO, a USO, and that's what happened here.
Yeah.
And how this ended was this thing took off at about 80 knots, he said, in another direction, still totally silent. The second in command turns to the commander and says, "Sir, how would you like me to report this in the logbook?" This is according to Ray, who was there. And the commander says, "Officers who report this kind of event in the logbook do not move up in rank." So it was not recorded.
Right.
And, I've told this story before, and it's on the radio, and another Navy guy came in. He's like, "Yep, that's how we handle it. None of these are recorded." And he says, "Yes."
Quite believe you. Yep.
Yeah, this happens regularly. This is not an unusual occurrence.
No.
Brilliant
story, Preston. Thank you. And an account, not exactly a story, but Les, have we more questions?
Yes. Do you know what, guys? We've got massive amounts of questions, and I will really try my best to get through most of these tonight. And I'll pick up on the next one. I Film UFOs is asking Preston, have you ever received any cryptid reports from in or around the Malibu anomaly?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Can't say I have. Lots of USOs. One guy thought he saw whales. It turned out to be little discs coming up under his boat. It's a huge marine sanctuary there. So there's a lot of wildlife. I do have a cryptid report in the Santa Monica Mountains, which is adjacent to this, involving sort of a black dog type report, which wasn't a dog. It vanished, had hollows, wasn't normal, hollow eyes, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
And I have received cryptid reports that are absolutely in conjunction with UFO reports. Like one guy had a UFO land in his backyard in Canyon Country, overlooking the national forest here in LA, and had a Bigfoot encounter the next day and a poltergeist outbreak following this, which all seem to be interrelated to some degree.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I want to cover some of that actually in a while. That's brilliant. Thank you.
So yeah.
I've cut you down again there, Preston. I didn't mean to, but I were going to ask you, and we will do after we get through these questions. Do you think all aspects of the unexplained, UFOs, cryptids are related in some way. So, but please don't answer it. We'll do that one.
All right.
Fire away, Les.
Yeah, okay. I've got another question from Patricia Adams. Writes, welcome to the show, Patricia.
Hi, Pat.
Yeah, and I think we've covered some of this because obviously these questions come in pretty early on, Preston. So the question is, why do you think they are covering it up? Going back to the government and military cover-ups and things like that.
So
Yeah.
I think we'd already touched on of why, haven't we?
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. I sure wish they would just stop. I don't see any benefit to it. Ultimately, it just creates a lot of fear and unrest and ignorance. But ultimately, yeah, I think it comes down to money and power and the fact that they can.
Yeah.
I
would agree.
It's slowly crumbling. I mean, the UFO cover-up's been a disaster. At some point, it will end. I'm not sure that our governments will ever voluntarily disclose, but it cannot go on forever. The cat's out of the bag. And if they don't do it, I think the ETs might just come down one day and like, that's it, we're done. You're ready to know the truth. So we'll see what happens. But
there is a sway in public opinion or public, is it belief? What would you call it? But more and more people seem able to accept the notion that what you're talking about has some substance and what I talk about, so I do wholeheartedly agree. But Les, questions, please.
Yeah, Jane Louise Bowery is asking, Preston, have you ever seen a UFO or grey yourself?
Yes, I sure have. I did have a little orb-like thing come down in front of my car in 1992. And I don't remember what happened after that. I think I had missing time. And after interviewing a lady and who had been abducted and had hybrid babies and just a crazy story, I had a UFO show up and basically give me a message because I was doubting her story, or I was starting to. And it said, no, she's for real. Actually told me this in a telepathic blast. And later had another sighting with her. I mean, she called them down. And yeah, I've had a good dozen sightings close up. And as far as a gray, I am not so sure. I did have one thing. I don't normally talk about this, but since you asked, I did wake up one day in my condo. This is when I lived back in Canoga Park some years ago. And I thought there was a cat walking across my bed, but I don't have a cat. I felt something walking across my bed and it woke me up. And I was lying on my side and I opened my eyes and I could have sworn I saw something standing there, but it darted out of the room super fast. My heart started thumping like a jackhammer. It was really quite frightening. And I turned around and went to sleep, which may sound odd, but having talked to people who've had this kind of experience, you don't often react the way you think you would. And in fact, it's sometimes perhaps imposed upon you, like, just go to sleep. So possibly have had a lot of alien dreams. And for that matter, I've had out-of-body experiences too, which, is a completely different topic, but I've had some interesting experiences with that where possibly I've encountered beings. So yeah, to some degree, but certainly not like to the degree of the people I've talked to who are full-on experiencers and taken regularly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and then are you going to have a break for a moment? Is that what you're running to? Hi, Amanda.
I personally have not. And in fact, having interviewed a lot of people, I think I had one, what I would call the classic Men in Black, which aren't government agents so much, is what appears to be human-ish looking ETs, with one gentleman who does have extensive lifetime of contact, says he did have Men in Black show up, basically threaten him. That's the only personal case I have, but we'll tell you, I've had a number of people who have had, government agents show up or had their house broken into and their notes stolen, their house broken into and had their hypnosis tapes
Right,
stolen.
sorry to cut across. I've just seen in chat, Les, you must be on mute, your microphone, mate. So carry on, Preston.
Yeah, one I personally haven't. One case really from a witness involving classic Men in Black, which I don't believe are human. There's two different types of Men in Black. Some people, say, Men in Black are government agents. Well, no, that's really a separate subject, which has just been sort of conflated together. But yeah, a lot of government agent interference with witnesses for sure. I'm interviewing a lady currently who's the subject of my next book, who's had real problems with surveillance. And I saw it happen myself when I was visiting her. They blocked the driveway. It was shocking. I'm like, who are these people? She's like, that's them. I told you. She sent me pictures and stuff. So yeah. Men in Black do show up.
Yep.
It's a real phenomenon.
Thank you. And I think we're going to go to a break,
okay.
Elliot.
Yeah, just a quick little, we call it a chalk ice break,
Oh, goody.
Preston. Yeah, we'll go to a little chalk ice break. And
All right.
So it won't be too long, and we'll see you back in a minute, guys. Wow. Hope you enjoyed that little digital interlude, and many thanks to Jessica and Nick Pym for some great music of Ronald Kinsella's digital artwork. And that's fantastic. We're going to carry on now with a couple more questions. And one of those questions is, and we've got some great questions in tonight, guys. Keep it up, it's fantastic. It's from Andy Ramsden. And Andy is asking, Preston, could any of these be something to do with MyLab?
MyLabs, military abductions. There are some researchers out there who would think almost all of this is MyLab. I don't think so. I think most of this is probably ETs. But I do wonder about this. I mean, I talked to one lady, Lycia Davidson, who was having experiences with Greys. They healed her of cancer, she says, but then after she'd have an experience, she would be abducted by the military who would basically question her. I don't think that's the classic MyLab case. But I interviewed Melinda Leslie. She had an experience where she saw a colonel in full dress on board the UFO while she was being abducted. That raises some serious questions. I think some of these, maybe MyLabs. I think our government probably does have the ability to stage an abduction and make people think this is aliens when it's not.
This interests me, Preston, and you might not have an answer for this, but how do you think they're doing it? Because if they've got the ability to take someone from their home in that way, unless they're drugging them and, I don't know, subliminally giving them messages that it's aliens, how are they doing this? Because if they've got this ability, surely they could infiltrate any place in the world to retrieve hostages, to do lots of other things that they're not doing.
Yeah, because that's not their priority. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. I hate to speculate in this field because
Yeah,
boom,
but
we're down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, but we are speculating because that's what you've just done, basically, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. I mean, you can't help it. I mean, you kind of, if you want to move the subject forward, you have to speculate to some degree.
Yeah.
And try and figure out what is going on here. But I don't think that most of these are my labs, because it would take an army of. I mean, this is far more widespread than people realize. I heard a quote from J. Allen Hynek that 1 in 40 people have had an onboard experience. I heard this very early on, and I thought, no, there's just no way it's that common, because I would know an abductee. And that's what got me to ask everyone that I knew. And I didn't have to ask 40 people. And it was, ended up writing an article for the MUFON Journal called 1 in 40, after surveying various researchers who thought that this was probably of epidemic proportions. And it was a year after that, the Roper organization did a poll on this subject and found 1 in 50 people show the markers of being a UFO abductee. So this is widespread. There's not enough military forces to do this to 1 in 50 people over, because it goes way back too.
Yeah.
This did, become publicized following the Betty and Barney Hill case, which sort of opened the communication lines. But Bud Hopkins has a case dating to the 1920s. So this has clearly been going on for quite some time. It's not military. Some of it perhaps, and I think there probably is an alien threat narrative that's being put forth by the military to make ETs appear to be the enemy. I cannot say for sure whether this is the case, but this is a huge sort of buzz in the UFO community right now. False flag, this sort of thing, alien invasion, staged. My labs, I think my labs do occur. And I particularly would point towards cases where people are living next to military bases, are deeply entrenched in military and their family, military intelligence perhaps, people who have negative experiences involving injuries and just horrific experiences. There's one case I was pretty darn sure where the guy, ended up dying of some disease, that this was in my lab. It's not my personal case. But yeah, I think this probably does take place. I'm very concerned about it. I know our government, I don't know this, but I suspect that they do have technology, brainwashing technology. The whole MJ12 and MK Ultra mind control programs is real. We've got documentation. People have suffered from this. They are absolutely doing research into mind control. We know this. This is an aspect of the field that hasn't got a lot of attention. People are just becoming aware of it. It's related to all this to some degree. But ultimately, I think most of what people are experiencing is not my labs.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely, Preston.
I might be able to squeeze a couple more questions in here, guys, and then we'll let you run with the rest of the show.
Are you happy to go with that, Preston? Yeah.
Yeah, Steve Lewis. This one's for you, Paul, actually.
Okay.
And Steve Lewis is asking, Paul, do you think your truth-proof videos / books are being watched by the secret agencies?
I don't know. We've heard Preston today saying that he thinks people who are looking into the subject, I won't say, I'm reluctant to say high profile, but looking into it with any level of seriousness are actually being watched themselves. So it could be. I mean, I did ruffle some feathers, I know, with the aircraft crashes that I were looking into. I definitely did. And there's some parts of the subject, there's some elements that I'm I'm kind of reluctant to talk about, and that's the missing people, because I think we've got to be so sensitive and respectful towards the people that are still alive and kicking, whose relatives and loved ones have gone missing. And I find it a delicate subject, especially when we're talking about UFOs, unexplained, because as Preston touched on earlier, we'd only be speculating. We've got no proof of what's happening, no solid concrete proof. We just know that they've gone missing in unusual circumstances. And I know that weren't quite the question, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Perhaps
I've just got sorry, Paul, to cut across, but I've got a follow-on question. I might as well just slip this one in, just a change of order here on my question list. Andy Ramsden is asking, Paul, what about the guy in the streets who said to you, "You're bringing down the lights"?
Bringing down the light, yes. Subtitle of Truth 3, it turned out to be. Yeah, when Preston were talking about the men in black and the strange entities, that's probably as close to being face to face with somebody that just weren't quite right. And if you want, guys, I'll talk about that on a stream some other time. I know I've spoke about it numerous times, but tonight it's for Preston. But you're right, Andy. Whatever he was, nobody stands with the shirt off, with skin set texture like this guy had, which looked like anybody knows what spam's like. Just like spam, devoid of any body hair, full wraparound glasses, telling me I'm bringing down the light, I'm causing too much trouble, I know what I'm doing. It was a strange situation, that particular one, 2014, I think it was. So, but let's direct some questions at Preston.
Yeah, I've got one more question, guys, and I'll let you run with the rest of what you've got wrote down, Paul.
Okay.
From Ralph Winter, Ralph is asking, Preston, could you tell us more about the amazing drive-in cinema UFO cases?
Well, that was going to be a question, so
it's preempted that one. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. I'm glad you brought it up, because that was such a shocker to me. Years ago, I was at work, and this lady came in as a new employee. Claudia was her name. Found out I was a UFO researcher. She says, "Boy, I have a story for you. I was at the Paramount Drive-In as a little kid with my family, and this UFO showed up, dropped down right next to the screen." I'm like, "You're kidding." She says, "No, it was below the level of the screen." She saw people dropping their popcorn, their drinks, fleeing the theater in a panic. Her parents were staring at it, hypnotized. I'm like, "Well, what did it look like?" She says, "It was huge. It was the color of a spoon, like bright, shiny silver." I'm like chrome. She's like, "Yeah, colored lights." It was making a whooshing noise and stayed there for a long time. She does not remember how it ended, which was very unusual. And that made me wonder. That's sort of the thing, a red flag for an abduction, possibly, because they actually forgot about it. They forgot about it until years later when they were listening to a radio show and someone called in and started describing their sighting. I'm like, "Oh my God, we were there. Why didn't we talk about it? How did we forget about this?" That was my first case. I thought, wow, that's a one-off. That has never happened before. That is crazy. And then I found 3 cases in a row while writing UFOs over Colorado. And it was the same thing. A UFO drops down or approaches from a distance and stops over the theater. These are, outdoor drive-in theaters, and hovered right over the screen in one case, flashed lights at people as they flashed their lights back at it, honked their horns, or, hovered right next to the screen. So very low level, absolutely no possibility of misidentification. These are very much like schoolyard encounters, where they are showing themselves off on purpose to large groups of people as an obvious publicity stunt. And these are long lasting. This is not something that just happens very quickly. Sometimes they'll stay for a while. They will flash their lights. They'll put on incredible maneuvers. They will release smaller craft. I've got 100 cases. I started looking into it. I'm like, I wonder if this is a thing. And I first went to all my UFO books, and there was almost none in there. I'm like, well, maybe I was wrong, until I started checking out newspaper articles and UFO databases, and ended up finding an enormous number of cases. And boy, are they amazing. Oh my God. Some of these cases are just will knock your socks off. I ended up, writing a book about it because I had no idea that this was a thing. And our government knows.
And I'm sure they do, Preston. Have you done multiple witness accounts to some of these drive-in sightings?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
all of them are multiple witness, obviously.
Well, yeah, but I didn't know how many people had come forward to speak to you.
Yeah, generally, I tracked most of these through the UFO literature, a few firsthand, and most of these cases do rely on the testimony of a single witness or a family who was there in their car. But yeah, each of them obviously have hundreds of witnesses, but most people aren't talking.
No.
They don't know about MUFON. If they call the police are like, we don't handle this. If they call the Air Force, they're like, sorry, we don't handle this either. 1 in 100 people report their sightings. Almost nobody does. So we can absolutely multiply the number of reported sightings by 100 easily. Again, far more common than people realize. But I think there's enough testimonies there to say that this is absolutely happening. And if I could just recite one case in detail.
Yeah, in detail, yeah.
I mean, I've got like 5 cases I would love to cover, but this one I like. This occurred at the terrorist drive-in in Bakersfield, California in 1952. There was a military witness. A lot of the early ones involved military witnesses because those were the only witnesses who could get anybody to listen. And he ended up calling the nearby sheriff station saying this object dropped down over the terrorist drive-in. It was this giant cigar-shaped craft, stopped right over the screen itself like they always do, flashed its lights like they do, and took off. This was a brief sighting in terms of these drive-in encounters. So he calls the Sheriff Leroy Hatfield was his name, and gives this sighting. Sheriff Hatfield hangs up the phone. It rings again. It's another person who had been at the theater, and the phone is ringing off the hook. Finally, he goes to the theater itself, takes the testimony of 30 people. There's 100 people still there talking about it. They all want to give a report. He's like, that's it. My arm's tired. I know what you saw. I've got enough details. I'm going to submit a report to the Air Force, which he did. And this turned out to be Edwards Air Force Base, which was the closest base. And Blue Book was just forming at this time. It was not called Blue Book, I don't believe, at this time. But the precursor of it, Project Grudge or Sign or something along those. So they submit a report. And this is where it gets interesting. The officer took the report, wrote it up. It was marked action. I saw this report online. It's declassified. And it was sent to the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base the next day. Wright-Patterson in Ohio, of course, this is UFO Central. This is where, allegedly UFO crash retrieval materials have been sent to. And not only that, the report was sent to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado, where we track all incoming and outgoing air traffic. And get this, to the Director of Intelligence at Washington, D.C. This is all in black and white. This is proof. Not the only case like this, which is sent to Wright-Patterson. And so they can deny it all they want. Say, we don't know what this is. You're seeing Venus, blah, blah, blah. They know it's real. They've known since at least the 1940s.
Yeah.
So they're lying. And we know this for sure, hands down. And they know about the drive-in theater phenomena. And that has almost no publicity. I was shocked that that knocked my socks off. I could not believe this was a thing. I'd been researching UFOs for decades. And boy, some of these cases are crazy.
Feel free to run another one past us because that's fascinating. If you want
to. Yeah. One guy I talked to personally, there was quite a few, a handful I was able to track personally. Sometimes they will affect the screen. So that would be a close encounter of the second kind. It's affecting the environment. But this case comes from Pat Mitchell, who as a teenager was at the South Hutch Drive-In in South Hutchinson, Kansas, in, I believe this was the late 1960s, to see a James Bond movie. And had gone to the theater with his friend. He's 19 years old or so. And got to the center of the theater, hooked up those little speakers onto the window, had his popcorn drinks. They were watching the movie. It was very exciting, James Bond. And his friend turns to him and says, "Do you see that light?" And Pat says, "Of course I do," because off in the distance, a light was approaching right at their eye line. Very quickly, within a matter of 3 to 5 minutes, it was right next to the screen, just like Claudia reported, almost exactly. To the right, below the screen itself, and the screen was some 50 feet wide, if I remember correctly. And this object was at almost, it was over half the size of the screen, so about 50 feet across.
I was going to actually ask you how big these screens were compared to the objects, but yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, the screen was 120 feet high. It was a big movie screen for this area.
Yeah.
And didn't cause panic in this case. Sometimes it will cause a panic. There's so many interesting cases. I could go on for 2 hours about this, but
have you any accounts of these things being seen at rock concerts or music festivals?
Yeah, a couple. That's the first thing I went to. I'm like, hey, why don't I know about this at rock concerts? And I found a handful, not 100, not nearly as many. There's a few at sporting events. A very famous one in Italy at a soccer concert, or some, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 or more people saw a UFO. It dropped angel hair, that substance that they sometimes emit, but not to the level of these drive-in theaters. But this South Hutchinson case, to wrap it up, this thing hovers there for 5 minutes, goes behind the screen, goes to the left side, hovers there for 5 minutes, does a full revolution around the entire movie theater, heads out over the road at about 20 miles per hour, hovers right above the road itself, and goes 20 miles per hour, 6 miles down the road. And, half the people in the theater took off chasing it. A convoy of, he's not sure how many. He says it was at least 30, 40 cars. I suspect it was probably more. And it stops again and rests there for 5 minutes before taking off straight up. Can't tell me this was not a display. I mean, this thing wanted to be seen. Why? Why is it wanting to be seen?
Preston, is there evidence of military aircraft showing up shortly after these events, or have you not picked any of that up?
Yep, that does happen in about 5 to 10 of these cases. Planes, helicopters will chase them away.
Yeah.
In this case, a bunch of people went to the local newspaper to report their sighting. Pat knew this because he had talked to them, and when the article did not appear in the paper, he went there himself. He had done some photography work for them. And he says, "What about this UFO that was over the South Hutch Drive-In?" And they're like, "What UFO?" He says, "Well, I know you know about it. People came in here and reported it. I'll tell you about it if you want to know." And they're like, "No, we don't. We're not interested." And that's when rumors began flying around town that military had shown up and quashed the story. So yeah, a lot of this stuff did receive publicity in local newspapers, but rarely did it go beyond that.
I see. Yeah, excellent. Do you want to touch on the Bigfoot UFO connection, or the possible connections, or your views on it, or encompass multi-phenomena events?
Yeah.
Are they all connected in some way to the UFO sightings, or what's your views on that?
Yeah, I think they are. And I still haven't completely figured this out because, I mean, it's hard. This is, again, a matter of speculation to some degree. What we know, here's the facts. People who have extensive encounters, as a rule, will report a wide variety of paranormal events. And I noticed this early on when I'm interviewing contactees. They're like, "Well, yeah, I have seen ghosts. I do have the ability of mediumship. I've had a near-death experience. I regularly have out-of-body experiences. I've got past life recall. I can do healing. I see shadow people." I'm like, "Oh, what is going on here?" And I was doing research into ghosts and all various aspects of the paranormal because of this. And I was working on this haunting case. It was strictly a haunting case, a haunted apartment in Van Nuys. And it was a vicious haunting, which, they ended up being almost possessed by these bad ghosts, ended up moving out of their apartment. And 1 week later had a very close-up UFO sighting, which they felt for sure was related to all of
Yeah,
this.
I was going to say, what's the common denominator here?
Yeah, so I'm like, wow, this is another head scratcher to me. Are they causing these hauntings? Are they interested in them? Are they igniting these psychic abilities in people? Does a person who have these encounters suddenly have a greater awareness of activity that's always been there? And I mentioned that case in Canyon Country where a guy had a UFO land in his backyard. It's a rural area, a Bigfoot encounter, and a poltergeist outbreak in the weeks that followed. So, I mean, that cements it for me. And I did a bunch of research into these Bigfoot connection. There are 50 cases like this, but I have to tell you, there's a million Bigfoot reports. Well, perhaps not a million, but more than we can count.
Yeah.
10,000, 100,000 easy. Bigfoot is real. The evidence is outstanding, but almost none of them involve UFOs. It would be a 1%, less even. And the same is true for UFOs. Very, very few. I mean, if you see a UFO, you're not likely to see a Bigfoot the next day. It's just not.
So, in the Bigfoot reports that you've looked into, UFOs, I take it from by UFOs, you're talking about some kind of structured craft. Have you encountered people telling you about light phenomena with the Bigfoot reports?
Yes, they can disappear in an explosion of light, or orbs, or classic UFOs. There's a case where a person saw a Bigfoot on board a UFO, coming out of a UFO, walking into a UFO, standing next to grays, who were basically ordering it around. This is the perception. So there are some researchers who say, oh, you know what? This isn't ETs. That's not Bigfoot. These aren't ghosts. This is an intelligence that's putting on various masks. I don't believe that that's the case. This is, I understand that why some people might conclude that. And I think that in some cases, perhaps there is some screen memories or alien tricksters or interdimensional entities putting on a little display here. And it's not what it appears to be.
I've thought that myself, and I do tend to think that some of this could be almost like a hive mind intelligence that can be many things.
Yeah,
which is I know you don't subscribe to that because you've just said that, but I've thought that myself and gone down that road and think there might be some truth to it. Do you want to talk about any of your cryptid, or stay with that if you want, Preston? Talk about some cryptid accounts.
Yeah, well, I would just like to say that those cases do turn up where these phenomena intersect perfectly. And I think in some of these cases probably are not ETs as we would think of it. But I will say, and I've said this earlier, that it's my assessment that most of this is extraterrestrial. It's the most popular theory among investigators and experiencers alike for a reason, because this extraterrestrial theory is almost not really a theory. I mean, we kind of know that it's super logical for one thing, because if there are not extraterrestrials, what are we? Are we not biological beings? We know who we are, or what we are to a certain extent, at least. We're physical beings on a planet. That's pretty much inescapable. And seeing the stars out there and having the reports of metallic craft with portholes that are landing, appearing on radar, being photographed, landing trace cases, people having implants in their bodies, people who are being taken on board these craft are not where they're supposed to be. They're not in their rooms. They're missing from the house. This is a physical phenomenon. I think if the crash retrieval reports are real, and I think they are, no, we don't have access to the actual evidence, but I think there's enough whistleblower accounts to say that this is real. All bets are off. We know this. They're being reverse engineered. There are alien craft. There are aliens. There are extraterrestrials, and this is what most people are experiencing. That's my assessment.
Yeah, great assessment.
I'm
sure we've got a few more questions, but just to stay with the Bigfoot just for a moment, because are you leaning towards the belief or the thoughts that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature that somehow evaded mankind for thousands of years?
Yes,
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because it's not quite what we think it is. Yes, we're flesh and blood, but we are also interdimensional. We have what we would call superhuman abilities. They're not superhuman, but there are reports throughout history of levitation, of invisibility, of teleportation, of healing, of all telekinesis, telepathy. These are natural human abilities which we have sort of are latent within us, but do manifest to people who are along the spiritual path of evolution.
And
We
you
are,
think that the cryptid, the Bigfoots, retained some of these abilities. Is that what you're saying?
yes, that's what I'm leading towards. I think they're probably more advanced spiritually than us, and because these are the report I've investigated Bigfoot. You know, I've written about this. I've got my own. I'm not a Bigfoot researcher by any means, but I've really wanted to cover all bases here because it's connected. And I'm like, well, we need to look into this. It's the last thing I wanted to do. I'm like, no, not Bigfoot. I resisted it because I'm like, what if it's real? This is a can of worms. This is no. But I had to when I got that Bigfoot case, and then I got another. And so I'm like, all right, fine, let's look into Bigfoot. And I've talked to people who've seen these things disappear in front of their eyes. And I started looking up cases. I'm like, wow, this is a thing. So I think there might be different types. I mean, we know there are different types. Some are probably less, perhaps, supernatural that and others are more evolved. But I think, yeah, they have the ability to travel perhaps interdimensionally, as ETs do, which has caused some people to think, oh, these are interdimensional beings. They're time travelers from the future. I'm like, no, I'm not so sure that's true either. There are a lot of questions surrounding all of these phenomena. But I think they're Bigfoot and ET and humans and all entities have an interdimensional aspect, and some are just further evolved in understanding and utilizing it.
Thank you. Great answer. Les, questions, please.
Yeah, thank you. Some great answers there. I've got to say we're getting some great questions in tonight, guys, and I noticed one or two of you have come in late to the show, and I've just got to say, where have you been? Yes. So the next question is from Patricia Adams Wright, and a little bit off a tangent here on what we've been discussing so far. She's asking, do you think Bob Lazar has been vindicated now we have produced Element 115?
Bob Lazar. Yes, he comes up fairly frequently. I cannot say one way or the other because I don't have any personal evidence whether he's telling the truth or not. But from an investigative standpoint, I think yes, he is absolutely telling the truth because he has been vindicated by numerous other whistleblowers from within Area 51, from numerous other researchers, including myself and Linda Moulton Howe and Bill Hamilton and George Knapp and many others have very similar reports from Bob Lazar. I talked to one guy who absolutely believes Bob Lazar is telling the truth. He's a contactee because he was taken on board a craft, and it was exactly in appearance how Bob Lazar described. It blew his mind when he saw the sketches, Bob Lazar and his information. Because wow, he says that's the craft I was taken on board. Yeah, and when someone's so viciously attacked and debunked, that always raises a red flag to me. And someone, because like, why is people are so upset about this guy if he's truly a hoaxer? Why are you spending so much effort to discredit him?
Yeah, you make a good point. And I can't speak for the guy who saw the craft because you're always going to get people saying, well, he's just jumping on the Bob Lazar bandwagon and he might not be telling the truth. Your abductee was being on board the craft, but I would agree with you that everybody's tried to, or a lot of people have tried to downplay Bob Lazar's claims, and he's still here, and people are still believing and coming up with evidence to support him. So I'm with you on that, Preston.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Nickname is asking the question, and I know we touched on it earlier on, Preston. What does Preston think about ET integration on Earth, And through his research, where does he think they are?
I sure do wonder about this. I suspect, and I have no direct evidence of this, that they are within all levels of society. And it wouldn't surprise me a bit if, people who are ETs are within government, at high levels. I don't know that that's true, but just given the fact that there are human-looking ETs, it seems absolutely logical to conclude that there are infiltrating at all levels. And some might be here as tourists, some might come as with specific agendas. There's a very interesting case from Leo Dworshak, who wrote a book, I think it was called UFOs Are Real, Take My Word, or something along those lines, who saw human-looking ETs, and they said that we're here to study your biology, and took him on board, he and his brother. And they said that they make regular visits to our planet. And there's a lot of cases like this. It's not just a couple. So, and they've been around for a very long time. We've got evidence of ET activity stretching back to prehistory. Egyptian hieroglyphs and petroglyphs and cave paintings and stove carvings and Middle-aged wood cuts and Renaissance paintings. We know they've been around forever. It makes perfect sense. And there's, ancient civilizations, the Vimyana of ancient India, Atlantis, Lemuria. It's very likely that we ourselves have some ET heritage. I'm not so sure we evolved on Earth. I can't prove that. This is pure speculation, but just given the ancient writings from the Bible, Native American cultures, indigenous cultures across the world point towards, a cultural relationship, an ancestral relationship with these people. So it's a tricky thing saying, are they among us? Well, yeah. I think a lot of contactees are full on saying, I'm a hybrid. This is coming up quite a bit. So I think that's a tricky question to answer.
Thanks for that answer. Do you want another question?
Yeah, let's go with it.
I've got a great question here from Andy Ramsden, and if you're still with us, Andy, I think this is a great question. Do you think those who see are chosen? Do you understand that question?
I think he's meaning as some people's sightings just random, and they're in right place at the wrong time, and they're encountering these things, or are people specifically chosen?
Oh, all right. Yeah, I understand the question now. Yes, I do. I think if you see a UFO, it's not random. It's not an accident, particularly if it's a close-up sighting. I think there probably are random sightings. If you happen to be in Phoenix during the Phoenix lights, you got lucky. But that itself was a clear display. Did they know everyone who was going to see it? Maybe, maybe not. But it's clear to me that if you see a UFO and it's close up within 1,000 feet, not only is this not random, it's intentional, but it could indicate deeper levels of contact. Often this is how a person will start having contact. They'll see a UFO, and next thing they know, figures are entering into their bedroom.
Yeah.
And they can show themselves to who they want. I've got cases where there are groups of people, and only some see the UFO and others don't. And they're in the same place. They are looking in the same area. I talked to a Navy guy who had this happen to him, and the ETs told him, oh yeah, we have that ability. Because he asked, he says, how come no one else saw it? I saw it and no one else did. He was pulled on board. They said, well, we have the ability to show ourselves to who we want to.
Amazing. Yep.
So yes, big yes on that. If you see a UFO, you can bet they're saying hi.
And
right.
If he's done with questions for a minute, I'll probably answer a few before we go, but I'd like people to know about your books before we end this, Preston, and where people can contact you. But can we just touch on, and I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, is it the Hopkinsville Goblins? And you've researched this or done some writing on this, and it's intriguing. I just read it and I thought, well, I've got to ask Preston, what this is about. I think it's self-explanatory, but tell us about it, please.
Yeah, I love this case. It's a classic. I love the early cases because they're less polluted, I think, by cultural influences and so forth. This is a case which took place in, Kentucky. I believe it was, oh gosh, 50s or 60s. And whole family saw this. They shot at these ETs, which does happen in some of these cases. Probably not a good idea, but they felt like they were being attacked, which I think is a natural reaction if something is coming at you like that. And I researched this case from an armchair perspective. I didn't talk to the witnesses personally. But found a bunch of cases in that area at that time involving green-skinned humanoids, which the Hopkinsville entities were. So that was the level of corroboration to it that I don't think even they are aware of. And this was a very extensive, credible case involving the Sutton family, who, all saw this, and they all went piled into their cars and told the police. And a very credible case of people seeing entities and a craft. Some reports that a craft actually crashed. This is new information coming out about this. That may have crashed in the wilderness area, in that area, following this incident. I'm not sure if that's true. This is, again, relying on eyewitness testimony pretty much solely. But I love that case. Yeah, it's a great case.
Fabulous. Who do you think, Preston's broken new ground within the subject and pushed it forward? In the last 10 years. I'll go back further if you want.
I think, everyone who's researched this is contributing. I think we're all playing a role. I am really proud of the research I've done into the UFO healing cases, because that was not being taken seriously. There's a lot of fear surrounding the subject, which I think is warranted, really, because the healing cases were being pushed aside. And I found out that they had come from most major researchers: Bud Hopkins, John Mack, David Jacobs, Edith Fiore, Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb. I mean, I can go down the list. They all have cases. Philip Mantle. There is a healing aspect, a benevolent aspect to this that has been overlooked for a very long time. And yeah, my book on that was the first. So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, each person, I'm really happy whenever a researcher puts out a book, whenever an experiencer goes public, because that's what it's going to take. Each person has a piece of the puzzle.
Well, while we're on with the healing cases, let's just jump to the other side of that, the darker side. So have you looked into animal mutilation, and what are your views on that? Even the human aspect of it?
Yeah, certainly I have. I've looked into cases of human injury, which does occur. And a lot of those I found were people who ran up to a landed UFO, like Travis Walton, who was apparently injured when this thing discharged on him. And he believes now that they took him on board to basically save his life.
Yeah.
And the Frederick Valentic case in Falcon Lake, Canada, got too close to a landed UFO and suffered radiation burns. Vomiting, nausea, hives, hair loss, weight loss. His blood lymphocyte level dropped. He had what amounted to radiation poisoning. This turns up in a number of cases. Denise Bishop of England was struck by a beam of light. This is a case from Timothy Good, a researcher I really respect. And this beam of light rendered her temporarily paralyzed. It retracted. It burned her hand. She went to the doctor. He's like, "Wow, this is curious," because the burn was fine at first, but progressively got worse. He's like, "What happened?" And she didn't want to say. He's like, "This looks like a laser burn. Did you get lasered?" And where would you get a burn like this? Because this is very unusual. She says, "Well, this is what happened." So yeah, injuries do occur. As far as mutilations, I have looked into it because I wrote UFOs over Colorado and UFOs over New Mexico, profiling those states, which are both the hardest hit in the United States in terms of cattle mutilations.
Yeah.
And it's not just cattle mutilations, it's a wide variety of animals, cases all across the world. But these two states have a lot of trouble with this. And there is some UFO activity going on with these cases. And some have reported seeing entities as well. But a lot, almost as a rule, also report black helicopters. I am not a mutilation researcher.
No.
But I have talked to Christopher O'Brien, who is one, and surveyed his research and looked at the research of Gabe Valdez and other leading researchers. And a lot of them have come to the conclusion that this is government, and that government will have to answer to this, that it's them who is doing this. And I thought, well, does that, how much sense does that even make? I mean, why would they even need to do this? For a couple of reasons. One, they can. It gives them access to genetic material. Cattle DNA is very similar to human DNA. Long strands of it are identical. It's a great source of genetic material for them that's cheap and easy, and also sort of puts forth the narrative that they want of this alien threat narrative. This is what other mutilation researchers have concluded. And
Yeah, I don't think I'd go down that line. I mean, if we're doing it, some government agency with vast resources that they've got, surely they'd just buy a ranch somewhere and conduct these experiments. I don't know. I mean, why would they go to those lengths? I know, once again, I'm speculating, but I don't see that myself, you know?
Yeah, I can only say what the other researchers have concluded. And I think ultimately our government, to some level, will have to answer for this because they have been implicated.
Right.
These are taking place mostly in New Mexico and Colorado, which is, a huge ranching industry. But some have noted that a lot of these cases are taking place in areas where there have been large levels of nuclear fallout. That could be a factor here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I talked to a contactee who said flat out, no, this is not ET. They're very upset about people who've concluded this. She's a conscious contactee. She says, no, they're not doing that. They don't do this. So I don't know. This is still an open question.
As someone, I can speak from personal experience here, and it doesn't mean I'm right here, Preston, but as someone who's spent best part of 3 years getting up at like 4 and 4:30 in the morning and going into darkened fields, finding the animals that were being done in my particular area, just to disprove all sorts of things, disprove that crows were removing eyes, just to disprove that it were natural animal predation, such as badgers and foxes killing the sheep. I saw I've not got no evidence of ET involvement, by the way, Preston, because I don't know what were doing it, but I really don't think humans, it was the hand of humans. I would go into some remote places and there were nobody there, and I was finding a lot of these carcasses, but I'm only one person, and that's only my view on it. And I wouldn't dare put my hand up and say it's some kind of ET involvement, because I just don't know what we're doing it. But my gut feeling is it wasn't human.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a mutilation researcher, but I did cover it in those books, and that's what I found.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about it, but I can't say from a contactee angle. I haven't heard, and no one's told me this. They haven't seen it.
Preston, it looks like we've got about 10 minutes to go. So obviously we might get another question or two in from Les, but I'd love people to know where they can get your contact information, your website, your books. Where can they find more out about Preston Dennett?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. My latest book is Wondrous. I do have a website. If you just punch my name in on the internet, it should take you there. The address is prestondennett.weebly.com. I've got excerpts of my books there, and you can also contact me through my website if you've got a question or a story or a case you'd like me to investigate or a comment. Always love hearing from people. My books are on Amazon, other online retailers, bookstores. I do have a YouTube channel. I'm putting up my research because some people are like, I don't have time to read. Some of my books are on Audible now. I'm trying to get that going up more. So this is such an important subject. I don't think people realize. You may be skeptical. You're like, it doesn't affect me. I'm like, yes, it does. Wait, just wait. Some people are going to be for a real wake-up call when, disclosure starts ramping up, when ETs start showing themselves in a more brazen way, which they already are. I don't think this phenomenon is ever going to stop.
No.
I think this is something that is going to change the world and could solve our energy crisis, our economic crisis, our environmental crisis, which are all largely manufactured anyway. And it's the ET agenda to wake people up.
That's the terrifying thing, though, Preston. If you look at it in that respect, if they solved our energy crisis and solved many other crises, there'd be mass unemployment, and who's going to pay the people? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that the ethics of what you're putting forward aren't good and right, but the implications of it, you can see why they want it, the mass cover up as well, in other aspects of it.
Yeah, well, that's because everyone has to work for a living when we really don't have to. We have enough automation, we have enough food, people do not need to work all day for slave wages. This is ridiculous. That what is being done to us, our food is being poisoned. There are several corporations, or the military industrial complex is doing this on purpose. They don't have our best interests in mind. The banking industry, the insurance industry, the Food and Drug Administration, Monsanto. I mean, these people know who they are. The oil industry, energy industry.
It just runs and runs and runs. Before we wind
government.
up, before we wind up, I'm going to ask Les if he does have any more questions, because we usually fail to get through them all. And have we, Les?
Oh boy, this is one of those nights where we're going to fail to get through them all, Paul. And we've got 3 pages on my tablet here.
No, we're not going to do it.
We're not going to do it. I would put a good bet on that. But I am not going to waste any more time. I'm going to ask the next question. And it's to see where I'm up to. What is it? Just have a look.
Yeah, well, let's rapid fire. Let's just boom, boom, boom.
Let's rapid guys. Yes. Because I scrolled up, I lost my mark. So I'll just going to pick somebody at random, I guess. Right, Preston, we've already touched on this one. Which researchers have been your favourite in this field? That's from Nickname. Paul already preempted that question from Nickname. Yeah. So I'll move on to the next one. Andy Ramsden is asking, what about experiencing dream state?
Yes, I think that does happen. And dream contact ETs will visit people in dreams, but dreams can also be a way to remember it as well. So there's multiple levels of that. And if you can learn out-of-body travel and lucid dreaming, that's a way to initiate contact. So dreams are connected to this to some degree. It's a question I ask. If you are having alien dreams, particularly following a sighting, that could be a sign of contact.
Excellent. Thank you. Les?
Oh, yeah, okay. Another one, MKMD Exploration and Paranormal. What's your thoughts on the interruption on the BBC News by ET in the 1980s? Now, you may not be aware of anything what happened on the BBC News, Preston. I don't know.
Yeah, I am aware of it. And It's not an isolated case. People have reported this on their televisions, on their radios, on their telephones. I think contact takes many different forms. It can be telepathic inspiration. It can be a phone call, which sounds absurd, but telling you, Bud Hopkins has cases, Ray Fowler, I've got cases, happened. It can happen in all different forms of media. They have the ability to affect electromagnetic instruments, and they will do this on occasion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Patricia Adams Wright is asking, what are they spiritually awakened to? I don't know what that's in relation to, that question, Patricia. What are they, the entities, I guess she's talking about, or greys or PCs?
Go on, Preston, over to you. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think what we're dealing with is a very technologically advanced number of races and also very spiritually advanced. So when people see ETs levitating, it's not always by machines. They have that ability, as humans do. And when people communicate with telepathy, it's because they have that ability to send and receive to you. This is how they communicate. They have spiritual abilities. We do too. They are awakened to a farther degree than we are, but people who interact with them also start to share that. And they're really attracted to people who are psychic and have some of these abilities. It's one of their main agendas. Wake up, humanity. If we can become a telepathic race again, we can overcome all the lies, greed, and corruption that is choking our society.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Lee Roscoe is asking, and it's one of those hot questions of the last 10, 15 years. And the question is this: what does Preston think of the moon landing? Are they false or real?
Real, hands down real. The evidence is overwhelming that this really occurred. But I don't think that they've released all the footage. I think part of the reasons for it were because of what they know is up there. I think the evidence is compelling that there are alien artifacts up there. And I have talked to a first-hand whistleblower who was involved in this, and I didn't believe it at first. And that's what got me into researching the moon. Yes, there's stuff going on up there that the general public isn't aware of. It's a huge cover-up that NASA is perpetrating. The truth will come out one day. But the moon landings absolutely did take place. I'm just not so sure they've released all the moon materials they brought back because some of them aren't rocks.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks for that, Preston. Andy Ramsden is asking, have you seen shadow men?
I personally can't say that I have. I have had some ghost encounters, during the haunting research. A lot of contactees report seeing shadow people. And I think what's happening is they've had their awareness raised, or perhaps their bioelectric field has been enhanced to a degree that it attracts them. There's a connection there. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think it's along those lines. A lot of contactees report shadow people.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a great question from Patricia Adams Wright. Preston, any abductions of children you have a report from?
Yes, as a general rule, if a person is having onboard experiences, it happens to you starting around age 4, 5, 2, act 2 to 9. Many children have this experience. And this is a note to parents out there. If your child comes running in and said, "There's a strange man in my room," and he took me, I floated up through the roof. Yes, this should absolutely be taught in schools because people who are having contact almost always begins in early childhood.
Just one thing, just to linger on that for a moment. The childhood reports, did you get them when the child grew and matured and they told you, well, these parents contacting you?
Parents.
Parents.
And often, rarely have I spoken to a child that's super young, but it has happened. One lady I was interviewing who was having encounters had the same thing happen to her child, and she had a scar in the same place her mom did.
Okay.
So that was one case. That does happen.
Thank you. I don't know whether there's time for one more. If not, we're just about there.
I think we're wrapped up there, guys. Yeah, the 50 pence in the electric meter is just about to run out for us at this end. And I've got to say, from my behalf, thank you, Preston, for coming on the show tonight on behalf of True Proof, and Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much, Preston. Been a pleasure. I hope you might consider coming back because I think we've just touched tip of iceberg here. You've just not stopped. We've not had to do much, have I?
Okay, well, I'll say thank you to you guys, and I'll just finish the show with our audience tonight. Well, there you go then, guys. Great show tonight. Preston, been a great guest. It's been an honour and a privilege to have him on the Truth Proof live stream. I've got to say, I'm sorry for not getting through all the questions tonight. There was such a rush at the end, and there always is. But I did try my best. So, on that note, I've got to say, have a safe weekend, and we hope you're all going to be safe for next Thursday's live stream from the Truth Proof channel. So it's from me, Les, from Digital Creations, and the team. See you next time.